training course. This is week 2, and we're talking about literature review and questions. So I was explaining the last time, I don't know if you were here, that a literature review is not just searching for information on a topic. Just like I would say, go and do a book review. You have to read this particular book and come with your own perspective, with your own opinion. What do you think about the content of this particular book? So now for research, what we call a literature review is that you are reading existing papers, of which we call literature. So you are reading literatures, you are reading existing papers, existing literature, and then you are bringing them together, and you are either criticizing them, you are narrating them, or you are drawing some form of conclusion. There are different type of literature review, but for the purpose of this beginners training course, I'm just going to be touching on the basics of literature review, the general form of literature review. Now, a literature review is a systematic survey to identify the knowledge gap. So what you are looking at here, you are looking at three broad categories. What is known in that particular topic? What did you find in that particular topic? The second thing is, what are the agreements? What are the disagreements? What are the conclusions from different papers that you have read? Why the third thing is, what is the knowledge gap? And one thing about literature review is that you are looking for what is known, what is unknown, and what is the knowledge gap, what is the research gap that you need to fill. Now, a research gap or a knowledge gap is something that's, is something that you need to fill, something that has not been done before. Now, the purpose of literature review, the primary purpose is to prevent you from what we call reinventing the wheels or recycling waste. Most times you want to do some certain research. How would you know that this particular research have not been done before? You want to do something new. You want to ensure that your research is filling a particular gap. So for example, I'm looking at the social media use of young people in general. That is a broad topic. But if I want to narrow down my topic, I would say, okay, so social media use among young people aged 18 to 25 in Nigeria. What I am to do is to do a literature review, is to read other papers, is to read existing papers on what they have said about social media use among adolescents, what they have said about social media use among young people. Because I want to find out what is known, what is the unknown, and what is the knowledge gap. And if my research is filling something new, if my research is closing this knowledge gap. So for example, that particular study might be done in the US, but no study must have been done, or there is no study at all in regards to the Nigeria population. So there are different kinds of knowledge gap. We have geographical knowledge gap. We have knowledge gap that can be different in context. So filling a particular gap is not necessarily doing something new entirely. It is just applying it to a different context. So a research might have been done on social media use among young people aged 18 to 25 in the United States, but it has not been done in Nigeria. Doing literature review would help me identify what is known, what is unknown, and the knowledge gap I am filling. So one of the key things about literature review is that it prevents you from making unnecessary study that have been done before. It prevents you from reinventing the wheels. It prevents you from recycling, studies that have been done in the past before. So it ensures that your research topic or your research study is filling a knowledge gap. So of course, the literature review must be comprehensive. You must search everywhere. You must search everywhere. You must ensure that you are getting relevant papers to your topic and identifying what is known, what is the unknown basically, and what is the research gap that your study wants to fill. So if I'm to do a study about the social media use among young people aged 18 to 25 and their effects maybe in their productivity or in their academics, I am to study comprehensively. I'm to search on social media use among young people, among adolescents, among undergraduates, among students in secondary schools, in high schools, in college. I am to do a comprehensive search. I'm to search everywhere. When you search everywhere, you're now bringing different papers, reading different papers and bringing them into perspective. And then you do what we call a synthesis. You bring them together. You ensure that they agree on one thing, they disagree on another thing, but you just bring them together. It is called a literature review. You are reviewing papers. And then your literature review ought to be critical. So you don't just believe every paper. So when you see a particular paper now, you want to critique the paper. You want to find out whether the paper is actually um, proving what it claims to prove. So it must be critical and it must be current. You can't say you want to do a review and you take 1990 something paper. The views might have already changed. Things might have, the system might have changed already. So you want a current paper that is usually between 5 to 10 years. Now, like I said again, literature review is not searching for information on a topic. It is bringing them together, critiquing it, and ensuring that what you are doing, your study that you are doing, the reason why you do literature review and research is to identify the knowledge gap and ensure that we are not reinventing the wheels. So the purpose of literature review is to prove that your research is necessary and it hasn't been done exactly the same way. Like I said, there are different kind of knowledge gap. It might be geographical knowledge gap. Maybe a study have been done in the US but have not been done in Nigeria. Maybe author A follow a particular method and this method have not been tried before. Maybe one particular author use questionnaires for his study and you are doing experimental work. So that alone is a gap in method. So it's something entirely new. Now, where do you search for literatures? You don't just go on Google and say, okay, you want to do a literature review, you just search any paper on Google or use any AI tool. You search from relevant database. Database are like libraries. For example, if I'm to tell you go and get a textbook or go and get this particular book, you would want to go to a bookshop. You would want to go to where the book is, like relevant sources. So when you're searching for research paper, credible research paper that have been examined by experts and have been trusted, that's what we call a peer-reviewed paper. It has been reviewed by different peers, by experts in that particular field. So you want to go to relevant database and you want to search for papers. So now we have PubMed, where you can get papers that are relating to medicine, pharmacology, anything that has to do with health or public health. We have Google Scholar or ResearchGate for any particular topic at all. You can enter such database and search for what you want to search. We have Scopus, Web of Science for high quality peer-reviewed journals. We have those that are native to Africa as a continent, that has context that are local to Africa and its demographics. So basically, there are more than 100 plus database, but these are like the most popular ones. We also have Wiley's, we have International Journal of Pharmacology, Ovid. We have different database. We have those that are specific for chemistry, specific for engineering, specific for social scientific research. We have different database where you can search for relevant papers for your literature review. Now, like I said again, you are identifying the gap when you are doing literature review, and the research gap or the knowledge gap can be in different contexts. We have the geographical gap. A particular study was done in the UK but has never been done in Nigeria. That is a particular gap that your study can be geared towards. We have the population gap. The drug was tested on adults, but it has not really been tested on elderly patients or even babies, or there is not much research or study done in that particular population. That's a population gap. We have the conflict gap. Maybe study A is saying this works, study B is saying it doesn't work. So you have to do a literature review and find out why they disagree and bring your own proposed study and identify the gap in which you want to fill. Are you going to agree with study A or are you going to agree with study B? Or are you going to disagree with both? We have the methodological gap. That's what I was explaining, that maybe previous studies might use surveys, they might use questionnaires, they might do an observational kind of study, but you might probably want to do a clinical trials or an experiment. So there are other gaps, but just for this beginners level, these are like the common gaps that you can look at when you are considering finding or doing a literature review and finding the gap in all the studies you have reviewed. Now, like I said, you search at, you look for your literatures or you look for your scientific papers at relevant sources, right? And if you want to search, you don't just type all the topics per se. You want to use the keywords, and you want to combine these keywords by using simple logic. So this simple logic is what we call the Boolean operators. It uses the or, and you can put them in quotes. So and connects two topics together and it narrows down your research. Or connects synonyms such as paracetamol or as acetaminophen. It also broadens your research to get more papers. While for quotes, you want to use a particular phrase. So combining these Boolean operators would help you narrow down your search. Don't forget that at first you are doing a comprehensive search. It will help you narrow down your search to find relevant papers instead of 10,000 irrelevant ones. So you are finding, let's say, 100 relevant papers instead of 10,000 irrelevant ones. Let me do something of practical, and I hope, okay, you guys are still here. You can still hear me. Let me enter PubMed. And let me say, I want to look at malaria in pregnant women receiving antenatal care, malaria treatment in pregnant women receiving antenatal care in Lagos, Nigeria. So I'm to search on PubMed. You can see that I have already put my filter on that, okay, I want existing literature and I want papers from the last 5 years till now. You can also put it from the last 10 years. You can see it's searching and there is nothing that is showing. That is because you are not using logic. You are not using the Boolean operators. So with the Boolean operators, I will pick relevant keywords. I'll pick relevant keywords that are in this. So I will pick malaria and pregnancy. Of course, only women get pregnant, so I'm just going to leave that. And I'll kind of pick an antenatal care. And then I'll leave Lagos because I'm doing a comprehensive search first. So let me see if that's going to bring out anything. Malaria and pregnancy and antenatal care. As you can see now, because I've used the Boolean operators and I've used relevant keywords, it has brought out antenatal care, malaria, pregnancy, sub-Saharan Africa. So I can click on this paper, and when I click on the paper, I can read the research and blah blah blah. Let's see for, okay, I can see the keywords are highlighted in bold, they are bolden. Then I can also add and Lagos State if there's any study at all done in Lagos. So let me just put Lagos and press enter. And you can see it's showing me everything in context. This is in sub-Saharan Africa. This is the systematic review, and probably this research is done by an author in Nigeria. That's why you can see Olalaye A. You can see here among Nigerian women, you can see Oka for IP. So there you can see something that is being narrowed down, and I have a lot of research papers for different topics, and you will see that you also get the same results. Now, when you are doing the literature review, I've seen many people like, hey, help me do my literature review. I don't know how to start. I don't know where to start from. You have to be organized because you are doing a review. So there's what we call thematic grouping. You have to group your literatures by theme. Don't forget that it depends on the complexity of your topic. It will not determine how many relevant papers you are to read. So for, let's say you are doing a literature review about the sample topic I just formed, you want to read at least, if not 10 papers, right? So now this template is going to organize your work so that when you are now writing, you're not going to be staring at a blank screen. You are going to know where to write from. So this template has the themes, the author and the year, the title of the paper, the study designs, the population of the sample, the method, the key findings or the results, the limitation of the study, and the relevance to your study. So, for example, Smith's 2022 did a study on drug X in hypertension, blah blah blah. The study design is a randomized controlled trial. So we are going to talk about study design in subsequent training. The population is 120 adults. The method is BP measurement over 12 weeks, blah 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 blah. The key finding is drug X reduced blood pressure significantly, while the limitation is a this particular sample size, that is the population sample, is actually very small. For 120 adults, you are making the claims that drug X reduced blood pressure, and we are in a world of about 7 billion people. So the sample size is small. That's one of the key limitations. And what is the relevance to your study? So you have to study something that is relevant, that is consistent with what you want to see, whether studies that agrees or studies that disagree. That is the reason for your review. So the relevance is that it supports your drug efficacy topic. Maybe you're testing on this particular drug X and you're reproposing it that, okay, this particular drug X actually reduce blood pressure and it can be applied to this population. So you have done a literature review and you have grouped it like this. You can group multiple studies like this. So it organize your work. If you're not organized, you can't write anything. You can't say you want to start going back to the website or you want to start writing from your notes. So you can actually put this in your, if you're the kind of person that like writing with your notepad, or writing this on your Excel sheet or on your Microsoft Word. Group your work by themes. And when you group your work by themes, then you can organize your work, you can synthesize your work, you can bring your work together and write your review article. If you don't do this, you are not going anywhere with a literature review and you would make mistake. So you can always come back to your matrix templates and see some things, add some things, or correct some things. Now, how do you actually do a literature review? First off, a side note is, how do you actually read a research paper? Let me go to a research paper, a sample research paper. So this research paper is the research article on subacute intramuscular toxicity study on aqueous cholecalciferol in Vista rats. So in simple language, it is just testing the toxicity of vitamin D. Vitamin D is also called cholecalciferol in Vista rats, that is of course white in color. Most scientific paper use scientific language, so it can be intimidating, but you don't necessarily need to read everything from beginning to the end. You don't necessarily, since if you are doing a literature review, then you don't have to read everything from beginning to the end. You just have to be strategic. So I would want to read, first of all, if I'm to pick which paper I am going to read in my literature review, or I want to read a research paper, I'm going to look at the title, understand what the paper is trying to talk about. Then I'm going to now read the abstract. The abstract is a brief summary, it's a synopsis of your entire paper, it's a brief summary of the entire paper. Now, when I read the abstract, and I'm going to have an idea of what the paper is trying to talk about, the entire paper is trying to talk about. Since I've already read the summary, it will determine if I am to proceed with reading the paper or if I'm to search for another literature or for another paper. After I've read the abstract, I am now going to go over to the introduction. And most papers, they are very structured in such a way that the introduction has subheadings, but this one you can take your time to read the introduction to find out the background of the study. And then after I've read the introduction, I am going straight to my conclusion, because I'm not reading in depth. I just want to get an idea from my literature review. I'm going to go straight to the conclusion. Okay, I've read the conclusion. I have an idea of the final thing or the final claim this paper is trying to make. After I've read the conclusion, I'm now going to go to the discussion. That is where I am discussing my findings. That is where I'm discussing everything the research, everything the study found or observed. After I've gone to my discussion, then I can now go to my results. If I want to look at the results, I want to look at the tables, since I've read the discussion, I have read the discussed results, I've read the interpretation, and I want to just have a glimpse at the charts, the figures, the tables. Then if I want to go a little bit deeper, I can now read the materials and method. What materials did they use? What is their stat analysis? What is their method? What is their procedure? But I think this one is for people that want to go deeper. If you actually love the research paper. So don't forget how to effectively read the research paper, your abstract, then go straight to your conclusion, go to your discussion, and go to your results and your method. But the most important thing that you need to get is once you have read your abstract, read your conclusion, read your discussion, you already understand what that paper is trying to say. If you feel like you need to understand more, you can now go further with your results, looking at the tables, the figures, and the charts, the analysis, and then the last thing should be the method. That is how you effectively read a scientific paper. If you don't want to waste too much time, you don't have to read everything from start to finish. You don't have to read everything accordingly. You'll be bored and it can be depressing. So now, how do you do a literature review? How do you conduct a literature review? The first step is to start with a clear focus. Understand what are the relevant topics, what are the relevant keywords. You cannot be doing a literature review on, for example, the effect of drug X on hypertension, and you now saw the effect of drug X on malaria, or the effect of drug X on heart attack. Even though they are closely related, you want to be specific, you want to have a clear focus, you want to understand that you are picking topics that are of consistent relevance to what you are looking for. Of course, you search from relevant database. Don't go and ask AI. Don't search from AI. Don't search from, all those ones. They draw us from multiple um, excuse me, they draw source from multiple studies and they are not very accurate because at the end of the day, they make unnecessary claims. They might not even cite correct reference. They might not give correct or accurate results. If you want to use AI, there's an ethical use of AI, but that's for another training. You have to read smart. Like I said, you don't have to read everything. So you should focus on the abstract, the conclusion. The reason why I wrote abstract, method, result, and conclusion is if you are doing an in-depth literature review, right? But basically, if you want to just have an idea of the paper, abstract, conclusion, discussion, and then you can now read the results and method. But basically, focus on abstract, then move to conclusion. They can now move to results, discussion, and the last thing should always be the method. But if you want to say, okay, author A uses this method, author B does not use this method, of course, you still get that in the abstract. But if you want to go deeper, you want to actually study what kind of methodology was used in this particular research, then you can now proceed to go further reading the method. Fill your literature matrix. Don't skip this. It helps organize and compare your studies easily. So when you fill this template, it gives you an overview of your entire study so that you not just be disorganized and trying to jump from one research paper or the other. Group your studies. Instead of writing paper by paper, group like this: studies that disagree, study that agrees, study with different method. So like I said, literature review is not a summary. So if you want to write, you cannot just say Smith 2020 said this, John 2021 said this. You are just listing or summarizing. You are not synthesizing, and every paper ought to be synthesized. A good literature review ought to have perfect synthesis. So instead of just listing or summarizing what each paper said and being robotic, you can bring your own perspective. You are citing these authors, right? But bring your own perspective. What do you think? Because it is a review, right? So I can say you can combine the studies into multiple studies into one sentence and show a relationship between them. So I can say that several studies have shown that drug X significantly reduced blood pressure. I can now cite all the studies I've combined. That's what we call synthesis. Smith 2020, John 2021, Lee 2022. However, some research reported minimal effect in elderly patients. Brown 2023. So you can also use linking words. You can use linking words or transition words such as however, moreover, furthermore, despite, in the same way, although. It gives your literature review logical flow. It gives it life. It makes it make sense. You can get what I'm trying to say. And you can also add your own perspective. As far as you are not, you are avoiding parallelism, which is citing authors as your citing other authors' originality, their ideas. as you're presenting them as your own. But when you cite your literature review, it must be well cited. After you have paraphrased your work and synthesized your work, then you can now give your perspective, and you don't make unnecessary claims. You don't just conclude that okay, no, you use words like this suggests, this shows, this highlight, this demonstrates. So you're not speaking by the influence of your own opinions. You are speaking by what you read. You are not being biased. So a literature review starts with a brief introduction of the topic, its importance, followed by the synthesized discussion of related study in grouped paragraph, and end by identifying gaps that your study aims to address. So a good literature review should have a background of what is known, what has been done in different papers. Then bringing these papers together, do they agree? Do they disagree? What are their differences? And then, of course, identify the limitations or the research gaps. Let me show you a literature review that I did. I can see it here. I did a particular study on, let me see. I hope I can find that study. Literature review. Okay. So you can see a sample of a good literature review. Now, there are literature review that you do on your own. Like there are those that you do as a study entirely, while there are those that you do as part of a study. This is one I did as a study entirely, like as a reading papers and writing a critical review. Now there are different kinds of literature review. There's a critical review, there's a narrative review, there's a systematic review. There are different kinds with their different level of in-depthness, if you get what I'm trying to say. So this is the literature review of Reforming Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics Education, a critical review of core competencies and teaching approach in healthcare. So what this is saying is that the education of clinical pharmacology in schools, in universities, it needs to be reformed, it needs to be redefined, it needs to be modified. And I'm writing a critical review, I'm critiquing papers based on their core competency and teaching approach, based on their teaching methods in healthcare. Now you can see that the first thing is that I did an abstract, wrote the keywords, and I'm moving over to the review article. That is the introduction. I gave a background of what has been done. You can see that I wrote here that Brickman et al. 2018 and Crowley et al. 2025 reported that many graduates, especially in Europe and other regions, see, I'm synthesizing the literature. And then I move further, Santiago et al. 2021 proposed that defining and teaching core pharmacological concepts is essential for improving prescribing safety, blah, 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 blah. Crowley et al. Promoted, blah, 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 blah. So you synthesize literature. You can always say, supporting this claim, this author said this, that author said that. So I gave a background or an introduction of what has been done so far. And then I start moving over to, this is just a single article. I did not put any heading per se. So you can see for the first paragraph, I gave a brief overview. Then I moved over to identifying their disagreements, their agreements, and then I moved further to talking about the research gaps or the limitations of the study. So you can see that to conclude, before the conclusion, the very last paragraph, let's see, because this is a critical review, right? This is a critical review. As I'm citing the papers, as I'm citing their findings, their methods, and everything, I'm also stating the weakness of that paper. So I am stating out the strengths and weaknesses, or the strengths and limitations of each paper. So you can see that I see that let's see here. Studies conducted by Brickman et al. And Crowley et al. Acknowledge that many institutions still rely mainly on lecture-based formats. The findings are true, blah, 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 blah. In contrast, they often promote passive learning. So I am critiquing their paper. Now, this is a critical review. Let me open a project topic to show you guys a literature review. Let's see if I can. Chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2 for project is literature review. Let's see. So yeah, you can see introduction. Oh, this is my project. I see. I am looking at antibiotics in catfishes, in farmed catfishes, and their implication in human health risks. So I gave an introduction. You can see that this one has heading. This is just a general literature review. I gave introduction. I grouped them into subheadings, right? Citing what each author found or what each author, their findings, citing them, you know, it must be cited. And I into different subheadings because different papers identify different things. And then you can see that I wrote the research gap and the justification of the study. So I wrote the research gap. I wrote here that a critical evaluation of literature review reviews several important gaps. So I said, firstly, the majority of the bioaccumulation and toxicity studies have been conducted outside Nigeria. So I'm looking at the limitation of existing literature that I've read. And then I went further to say, okay, although studies such as Olatoye and Afisus 2013 and Yusuf and um, Odetoku 2013 have confirmed the presence of tetracycline residue in Nigerian catfish, that did not investigate toxicity effects of bioaccumulation dynamics under controlled experimental conditions. Likewise, Chen et al. 2018 provided valuable insights, blah, 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 blah. So I stated the limitations. Then I identified the research gap in those limitations and proposed that my present study addresses this research gap. That is a study that is addressing the knowledge gap. So the purpose of doing this, the purpose of me doing this chapter 2, this literature review, is to ensure that I'm not doing studies that have been done before. I am doing something that can fill a particular research gap. So I've done my reviews. I've read, if not all, majority of these papers. I've written them what I found, what is known, what is unknown, what are their agreements, their disagreements, what did they found, what did they find concerning this topic, and then I'm concluding by saying this my own study, my particular study is going to fill this research gap. So I'm adding to even if I'm doing just one thing, I am still filling the research gap. The research gap can never be entirely closed. But more and more studies, research is dynamics. More and more studies are being done to answer specific research question. There's always a limitation. There is always, it is not universally true per se. So that brings us to the end of this short class.